February 17, 2026, Visakhapatnam, India. The Iranian Navy frigate IRIS Dena sails into port in formation with warships from 74 nations. India's Eastern Naval Command posts a photograph on social media. Indian President Draupadi Murmu poses with Iranian sailors on the deck. Members of the Dena's crew march in a parade through the streets of the city. They visit the Taj Mahal. They attend cultural events hosted by the Indian Navy. This is MILAN 2026, one of the largest multinational naval exercises in Asia, hosted by India to demonstrate its role as the region's leading maritime power and preferred security partner. The United States is also at MILAN 2026, not with a warship. The USS Pinckney, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, had been scheduled to attend. It was diverted to Singapore on February 15th, the opening day of the exercise, 13 days before the war. What the United States did send was a P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft from Patrol Squadron 4. A P-8A is not a ceremonial presence. It is purpose-built to search, detect, classify, localize, track, and destroy submarines. Its sensor suite, sonobuoys, inverse synthetic aperture radar, and integrated acoustic sensor array, is the most sophisticated airborne anti-submarine warfare platform in the American arsenal. That aircraft flew drills alongside Iranian naval assets at MILAN 2026, including the IRIS Dena. 7 days after the exercise ended, February 28th, the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury. The Dena was still in the Indian Ocean, sailing home to Iran. March 4th, 5:08 a.m. local time, approximately 19 nautical miles south of Galle, Sri Lanka. The IRIS Dena transmitted a distress call reporting an explosion. Sri Lankan Navy vessels arrived at the coordinates to find an oil slick, floating life rafts and bodies in the water. The frigate itself was already gone. It had sunk within 2 to 3 minutes of impact. One Mark 48 heavyweight torpedo, fired from the Los Angeles-class attack submarine USS Charlotte, had detonated beneath the Dena's stern and broken the ship's keel. 87 crew members were recovered dead, 32 survived. 61 remain missing. The ship's full complement was approximately 180, including members of the Iranian Navy band. At the Pentagon, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth stepped to the podium and released black and white periscope footage of the attack. An American submarine sank an Iranian warship that thought it was safe in international waters. Instead, it was sunk by a torpedo. He paused. Quiet death. We do not celebrate weapons at Navy Beacon. We calculate whether they work. And the calculation surrounding the sinking of the IRIS Dena involves more variables than any single Pentagon briefing has addressed. Because this is not just a story about a torpedo. It is a story about what happens when a war fights itself across every ocean simultaneously, and the consequences that produces for every nation that thought it was standing at a safe distance. Subscribe to Navy Beacon, because what USS Charlotte did on March 4th was the first time an American submarine has sunk an enemy warship by torpedo since August 14, 1945. That is not a footnote. That is the opening of a question that has no clean answer. Let us start with the ship itself, because understanding what the Dena was tells you everything about why its sinking became an international incident rather than a clean tactical operation. The IRIS Dena is a Mujj-class frigate, one of Iran's domestically designed and built surface combatants. 140 meters long, approximately 1,500 tons displacement, armed with surface-to-air missiles, anti-ship missiles, deck guns, torpedo tubes, and a helicopter platform. Commissioned into service in 2021, it was one of the newest and most capable ships in the Iranian fleet. It was also, in the years before the war, one of the most visible instruments of Iranian naval diplomacy. In 2023, the Dena sailed with the converted tanker IRIS Makran through the Atlantic and into the Pacific, a deliberate signal that Iran intended to project naval power beyond the Persian Gulf. It visited Brazil. It operated in waters where Iranian warships had never been seen. The message was explicit. Iran was building a blue water capability. By the time war began, the Dena was sailing home from the most prominent international naval gathering it had ever attended. Hosted by a country that had officially welcomed its crew, photographed its officers with the Indian president, and walked its sailors through one of the world's most famous monuments. Type equation in the comments if you already see the problem forming. Now let us look at USS Charlotte, because the submarine that fired the torpedo is itself a piece of the equation. USS Charlotte is a Los Angeles-class nuclear-powered fast attack submarine, SSN 766, commissioned in 1994. Length, over 100 meters. Displacement, 6,900 tons submerged. Propulsion, one S-6G nuclear reactor driving a single shaft. Maximum submerged speed, classified but publicly estimated at over 25 knots. Operating depth, classified, but Los Angeles-class boats routinely operate below 300 meters. Armament, 26. Mark 48 ADCAP heavyweight torpedoes and Tomahawk cruise missiles through 12 vertical launch tubes and 4 torpedo tubes. The Mark 48 torpedo that struck the Dena travels at over 55 knots underwater. Its warhead contains approximately 300 kilograms of PBXN-103 high explosive. At detonation beneath a 1,500-ton frigate, the resulting pressure wave collapses the hull from below. The ship does not so much sink as it ceases to be a ship. 2 to 3 minutes. That is how long the IRIS Dena remained above the surface after the torpedo struck. 124 crew members who were aboard at the moment of impact are either dead or still missing. Here is the detail that makes the Charlotte's presence in that specific patch of ocean remarkable, and that has not been fully examined in any American publication. The USS Pinckney was scheduled to attend Milan 2026. It withdrew 13 days before Operation Epic Fury began. The most likely explanation, based on the timeline, is that the Pinckney was redirected for operational reasons related to the coming war, which means that American naval planning for the Iran conflict was already affecting Indian Ocean Force disposition, while Iranian sailors were still weeks away from completing their participation in an Indian-hosted exercise. The P-8A Poseidon that remained at Milan flew anti-submarine warfare drills alongside Iranian naval assets, including the Dena, from February 17th through February 25th. The P-8A's sonobuoy patterns, radar tracks, and acoustic data on the vessels it exercised alongside are collected, processed, and shared within the American military's maritime surveillance architecture. Whether USS Charlotte used any data collected by the P-8A during Milan 2026 to locate the IRIS Dena in the Indian Ocean after the war began has not been officially addressed by the Pentagon. An Indian strategic analyst named Brahma Chelani raised the question publicly. Under the COM, CASA, and LEMOA agreements between the United States and India, both countries share sensitive maritime intelligence data. If a U.S. attack submarine used data from those shared systems, data collected, in part, during an Indian-hosted exercise, to locate and sink an Iranian frigate that had just left an Indian port as a guest of the Indian Navy, it would represent something that has no clean diplomatic language. India's government issued no public criticism of the sinking. India's Navy posted a welcoming photograph of the Dena's arrival at Visakhapatnam on February 17th. It took more than 24 hours after the sinking for India's Navy to issue any statement at all, and that statement mentioned only that it had received distress signals and coordinated with Sri Lanka on the rescue. The Indian president had posed with these sailors 6 days before they were killed. India's silence is itself a form of speech. It says that India calculated, after the fact, that challenging the United States over the sinking would cost more than absorbing the diplomatic damage of appearing to have been an unwitting staging point for a military strike on a vessel that was its guest. Chelani called it a strategic embarrassment for New Delhi. He said that Washington had transformed India's maritime neighborhood into a war zone, challenging India's authority and its reputation as the preferred security partner in the Indian Ocean region. That is a significant statement from a country that has spent decades positioning itself as the guarantor of Indian Ocean security. Now let us look at the legal framework, because this is where the sinking becomes more complicated than either side wants to acknowledge publicly. The law of naval warfare is clear on one central point. An enemy warship is a lawful military objective regardless of its current activity, its location, or its proximity to a declared combat zone. The IRIS Dena flew the flag of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Iran and the United States were in a state of active armed conflict as of February 28th. Under the established rules of naval warfare, the Dena could be legally targeted anywhere in international waters without prior warning. That principle, established over centuries of maritime law and codified in documents including the Newport Manual on the Law of Naval Warfare, was confirmed by leading international law scholars in the days after the sinking. The strike was legal, but legal and unambiguous are different things. The Dena had just participated in a multinational exercise operating under what naval analysts describe as peace protocol, an informal arrangement under which participating vessels operate in a non-combat configuration with tightly controlled ammunition to ensure safety during diplomatic events. Whether the Dena's weapon systems were loaded, whether she could have defended herself against the Charlotte's torpedo at the moment of impact, is a question that has not been definitively answered. What is known is that the Charlotte fired from beyond detection range. The Dena's sonar would not have picked up the submarine before the torpedo was already in the water. The ship had no realistic opportunity to maneuver, countermeasure, or return fire regardless of whether her systems were loaded or not. The question of rescue compounds the legal debate. Article 18 of the Second Geneva Convention of 1949 requires belligerents to take all possible measures to search for and rescue survivors of sunk vessels during armed conflict. That obligation was written specifically in response to the conduct of German and Japanese submarines in World War II. Submarines that routinely killed survivors in the water after sinking ships. USS Charlotte did not surface after the torpedo struck. It did not transmit a distress call on behalf of the Dena's crew to ships in the area capable of rescue. It departed. The legal scholars who analyzed the incident were divided on this point. Those who argued the Charlotte was legally correct pointed to the established doctrine that submarines face unique survivability risks when surfacing in contested waters and cannot be required to endanger themselves for rescue operations. A 1956 resolution of the Geneva Diplomatic Conference acknowledged this reality. Those who argued the Charlotte had an obligation it did not fulfill pointed to the fact that the Indian Ocean in that area was not a contested combat zone. The Charlotte faced no hostile forces. The Dena was not firing back. The risk of surfacing to transmit a rescue call or remain in the area while Sri Lankan vessels responded was, by any reasonable assessment, minimal. The Nuremberg trial of Admiral Karl Dönitz addressed exactly this question after World War II. Dönitz was charged with ordering German submarines not to rescue survivors of ships they sank. The tribunal found him guilty on other counts but did not convict him on the rescue charge, in part because American Admiral Chester Nimitz submitted a statement that U.S. submarines in the Pacific had followed similar practices for operational security reasons. The precedent has been a source of legal controversy in international maritime law ever since. USS Charlotte followed a precedent established through a practice that was itself argued to be illegal at Nuremberg. Now let us look at the three countries left to deal with the consequences. Sri Lanka had declared neutrality. It had done what any neutral maritime nation is required to do under the law of the sea. It responded to a distress call and launched a rescue operation. It recovered 87 bodies and 32 survivors. It took custody of a second Iranian naval vessel, IRIS Dena, which requested assistance after the Dena went down. Sri Lanka, a country of 22 million people with no direct stake in the Iran war, found itself hosting the human wreckage of an engagement between two powers, fighting a conflict 2,000 miles away. The United States pressured Sri Lanka not to repatriate the Iranian survivors immediately. The U.S. also asked Sri Lankan authorities whether any crew members showed interest in defecting. Sri Lanka declined to comment publicly on both requests. It repatriated the bodies and survivors on its own timeline. India had more to lose. The damage to India's credibility as an Indian Ocean security guarantor, as the country that hosts the navies of 74 nations in friendship exercises, and then cannot prevent one of those navies from being sunk within its maritime neighborhood days after departure, was not trivial. The Indian Navy had welcomed the Dena. It had posted photographs. It had marched with the crew. And then, when the ship was killed, it waited more than 24 hours to say anything. That silence was noticed in every capital from Tehran to Beijing to Canberra. Australia confirmed that 3 AUKUS-embedded Australian Defence Force personnel were aboard USS Charlotte during the attack. Australia's Prime Minister stated those personnel did not participate in any offensive action and were there purely for training under the submarine transfer program. Australia, like India, had not been informed the war was coming, which raises the question that the Pentagon has not directly addressed. The USS Pinckney was diverted from Milan 2026 on February 15th, the first day of the exercise, 13 days before the strikes. The USS Charlotte, or a submarine with equivalent capability, was positioned in the Indian Ocean and had acquired a firing solution on the IRIS Dena before the war was publicly announced. The operational planning that put USS Charlotte in a position to sink IRIS Dena on March 4th was not improvised after the war began. It was prepared while American and Iranian naval personnel were participating in the same multinational exercise. While the Iranian crew was touring the Taj Mahal, American military planners had already identified their ship as a target. The Iranian foreign minister identified the IRIS Dena as being 2,000 miles from Iran's shores when it was struck. He called it an atrocity at sea. He said the United States would bitterly regret the precedent it had set. That last statement is worth examining carefully, because the precedent is specific. Before March 4th, 2026, the last time a submarine sank a surface warship by torpedo was May 2nd, 1982. The Royal Navy submarine, HMS Conqueror, struck the Argentine cruiser ARA, General Belgrano, with 2 Mark 8 torpedoes in the South Atlantic. 323 Argentine sailors were killed. The sinking was deeply controversial. The Belgrano was outside the exclusion zone Britain had declared around the Falkland Islands, and was reportedly sailing away from the British task force when it was hit. The British government maintained the ship posed a threat regardless of its immediate heading. The parallel is not accidental. Both sinkings occurred outside declared combat zones. Both targets were naval vessels that had not fired on the attacking submarine. Both were struck without warning. Both generated legal controversy that outlasted the conflicts themselves. What the Conqueror precedent established, and what the Charlotte attack confirms, is that in an active naval war, no ship flying an enemy flag is safe anywhere in international waters. Distance from the declared theater of operations is not protection. Participation in a neutral nation's exercise is not protection. The absence of offensive action at the moment of attack is not protection. Every navy in the world understood that principle in theory before March 4th. USS Charlotte proved it with a Mark 48 torpedo in practice. The consequences for global naval deployments are already visible. Multiple navies that routinely operate in the Indian Ocean have quietly adjusted their track plans. Iranian naval vessels that were not in the Persian Gulf when the war began, including ships that had sought safe harbor in Indian and Sri Lankan ports, have had to calculate whether remaining in port or attempting to return home posed the greater risk. IRIS Dena, another Iranian vessel that had been at Milan 2026, accepted India's offer of humanitarian docking at Kochi. It is still there. It has not attempted to return to Iran. IRIS Bushehr was taken into Sri Lankan custody at Trincomalee. 204 sailors were brought ashore. The ship remains under Sri Lankan control. Both decisions reflect the same calculation. No Iranian warship in the Indian Ocean can safely transit to Iran, while USS Charlotte, or any American attack submarine, remains operational in those waters. That is what naval superiority actually looks like when it is demonstrated rather than declared. Not carrier strike groups conducting visible operations in a defined theater. A single submarine, running silent, that can appear anywhere in any ocean and sink any ship flying an enemy flag without warning. Hegseth called it quiet death. He was describing a capability, not just an action. Here is what the equation produces at the strategic level. And why the Iranian foreign minister's warning about precedent is the variable that no one in Washington has fully priced. The United States just demonstrated for the first time in 81 years that American submarines will engage enemy warships by torpedo in international waters, outside declared combat zones, at ranges of 2,000 miles from the primary theater of conflict, without warning, without rescue operations, and without advance notice to neutral nations whose territorial waters may be affected by the resulting casualties. That demonstration was observed by every naval power on Earth. China operates a growing fleet of submarines. Russia operates submarines. Both countries are watching how the American submarine force has been employed in this conflict. Both countries are running their own calculations about what rules of engagement are now established by American practice rather than American doctrine. The Falklands precedent took years to fully process through international maritime law. The IRIS Dena will take years as well. The legal scholars are still writing. The diplomatic fallout in South Asia has not fully resolved. India has not explained its silence. Australia has not explained what its embedded personnel knew or when they knew it. USS Charlotte has not surfaced publicly since the attack. Submarine movements are classified. It could be anywhere. That is the calculation that is running in every naval ministry in the world right now. Not where the American carrier strike groups are. Those are visible, trackable, and designed to be seen. But where the American submarines are, what they have already acquired firing solutions on, which flags they are prepared to sink without warning in waters that the targeted nation believed were safe. Quiet death does not announce itself. That is the entire point. We do not worship the machine at Navy Beacon. We worship the equation. And the equation here is not confined to the Persian Gulf, or the Strait of Hormuz, or the 6 nautical miles of shipping lane that everyone is watching. It is running silently, 20 meters below the surface, somewhere in the Indian Ocean. Stay vigilant, stay informed. The water you cannot see is the water that matters most.